As believers, how do we view the news? And what is going on this summer? What big events are happening? What's going on out there on this slice of fresh bread? Welcome to Fresh Bread, a podcast ministry of Grace Bible Church, Gainesville, with Pastor Brandon and Pastor Keith. Well, thanks for clicking on Fresh Bread. Fresh Bread, we're bringing the truth of God's Word to a starving world. Fresh Bread Podcast 109. And we've been taking the summer off this year. We're hoping that you're having a great summer. Pastor Brandon's having a great summer. He's doing a lot of traveling and all kinds of stuff. I've been having an interesting summer as well, busy, but enjoying it. And so what we thought we'd do today on Fresh Bread is talk a little bit about world events, things that are going on in the news. We'll kind of get caught up on everything and see what's going on and how the news affects us as believers and what we can look forward to maybe as the summer rolls on. So, Pastor Brandon, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm hopefully well rested and ready to attack the things that need to be that we need to be doing.
Do you want to share anything what you've been up to this summer?
Well, I started out in going to Guatemala and spending a week there with my wife and with Chloe and Pablo, my daughter and son-in-law, and spent some time with Cesar Garcia there in Guatemala and had a good time. It was fun. And then we came back for a few days and then we left. Angie and I left again and went to Arkansas, which is where I'm from, visited Fayetteville, which is where the University of Arkansas is at. We spent a couple of days there kind of, looking around and reminiscing about old days that way. And I met my sister there as well, so we spent some time with her and her family. And then we traveled up to Kansas. We drove up to Kansas from Fayetteville and spent some time with Angie's mom, my mother-in-law. So we spent about 3 or 4 days with her and just kind of relaxed and had an enjoyable time with her. And then we came back and we were there for a Sunday at church, at Grace Bible Church, and then we went on a cruise as a family. We do a family vacation every year, or try to, and we did a family cruise this year.
Wow, you've been traveling a lot.
Yeah, thankfully I don't have anything scheduled. Oh, it's bittersweet. It's bitter that I actually enjoy spending time away and recharging, but it's obviously sweet because I get to be home because I enjoy that as well. And, I don't like missing church and, I don't like to be away that way. So,
yeah. Yeah. So you were kind of in the heartland being in Kansas and Arkansas. Is there what are people talking about in the heartland of the US of A?
Well, anymore, it's the same.
Same. Nothing big.
It's the same. It's the same conversations that we're all having because it's, social media impacts, what we're thinking and obviously media. And so it's all the same conversations.
Yeah. Yeah, that is true.
It's interesting because, obviously, if you think about sports, it's different because, they're talking about the Razorbacks or, while we're here in Gainesville, we talk about the Gators and, Minnesota, they talk about the Gophers. So yeah, it is different that way, but it's not, in terms of the national conversation, it's not different.
Yeah. Well, I just wondered, what was on their mind because we're going to get into some of these news stories here, and I guess we can start with the Texas flooding. That was on the 4th of July. That was kind of a shocker to see that many people. 100 people died on this flood on this camp. There was a campground where people were camping, and I guess this little river, not a big one, but it rose 26 feet in 1 hour with rain, and
wow.
That was amazing, an amazing devastation there. I didn't know if you wanted to share some of your thoughts on that. If you heard that while you were on a cruise then when that happened, I don't know if you heard anything about that.
Well, I did hear about it and read about it. It is certainly a devastating thing, and anytime there's loss of life due to natural disaster, we should, as Christians, we should definitely our hearts go out to them, and we should be, hoping to or trying to support that the best we can as Christians. It's interesting with this particular situation. One of the places that got affected was a Christian camp. It's interesting because I haven't actually looked into it directly, but just based on the name and based on what I've seen, it seems to be a pretty liberal camp, basically from a liberal arm of Christianity. But we need to be careful. There's still a loss of life, and we may not agree with them doctrinally or in terms of the philosophy of ministry, but at the same time, there is a loss of life, and we need to recognize that, disaster happens, and when it does, people lose their lives, and, or their lives are changed profoundly depending on what happens. And so as Christians, we need to have there needs to be a brotherly love. We need to show, God shows common grace to people, and we need to show that common grace. But it also shows that, in a fallen world, things like this happen. And, and God actually has his purpose for it. And, we may not know or understand completely, but he has his purposes. And ultimately those purposes are his. They're for him to know. I don't have a need to know it. So, for somebody that might be tempted to judge, what they believe, and say, well, maybe they deserved it type of attitude would be a wrong way to look at it, would be a sinful way to look at it, that, we don't know what God's purpose was in it. It very well could be that there's a judgment there, but that's not something that it's not in our pay grade.
Yeah, what do we do? I was going to ask you about this. I don't know if you saw some of the social media posts on after this happened, because there was also a girls' camp there. There were a lot of these young girls were all washed away, and I think they're still looking for some of the bodies. But some people have posted that because they believed that they were Trump supporter girls, their parents or whatever, that they were saying, hey, good riddance, that we're glad they're gone and less mega in the world. And just these incredibly horrible things to say. What is happening to our society when you see things like this? Like, I don't remember ever seeing things like this happen like 30 years ago, when people would say things like that. That just is so cruel to me.
Well, I think part of it is it's not. I don't think things have changed in the sense that people are still were still sinful 30 years ago, and they had these thoughts 30 years ago, or 50 years ago, or 100 years ago, that these thoughts are something foreign that has changed. I will say that basically social media has given voice to people. And so you have these opportunities to say these things on social media where, and everybody wants to have some sort of take, that way they can gain an audience. And so there's this tendency to say the most outrageous things in order to get attention, and then you have comment sections that are available even on, Fox News website or CNN. You can comment on these stories, and it just gives people an opportunity to say these things anonymously. And you've heard the term or the phrase keyboard warrior, and so they would never say these things publicly, in a public fashion in front of a bunch of people. They would never say some of the things they're saying, but they're willing to say it in that situation because they sense that they have protection. They're not going to be held to account for what they're saying. And so I think that's what has done. Obviously, the society is spiraling, and we know that it's proceeding from bad to worse. And we see that. You and I have definitely seen it. I'm 54, you're in your 60s. And so we both have seen the changes over those past 50 years. But, and there's no doubt that society has gotten worse since then. But I think that the biggest issue is that the heart of man is being exposed. I think that's more, and I think it's being exposed by having access to these tools that allow us to speak our mind in that way.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I'm glad, because one of the posts was from a pediatrician she was a woman pediatrician who said something about I'm glad that that the megas are gone, and we're sad for all the others that died, or something like that. And she got fired, so I was glad to hear that. It's just like rubbing salt in the wound with things, and I just don't know. Yeah, the mentality of that just seems not right. Even even if the worst of the worst person is put to death, like I don't see like people should be having parties. Like it just
Sure.
doesn't seem right. I mean, you can say, wow, even like let's say Adolf Hitler, when I think we found in the United States found out he was dead. I don't know if people celebrate it or not, but it's not something you really celebrate. You just go, okay, and you
Well,
move on.
I think you can celebrate that justice was done,
Yeah,
but that he's gone and he's not going to be able to perpetrate evil anymore. But I don't think we should be celebrating the actual loss of life.
yeah,
And especially someone, in the situation where that it's probable, like with Hitler, it's probable he'll be suffering in eternal hell, and he deserves that. If he didn't trust in the Lord Jesus Christ, which I have absolutely no reason to believe that he did, but I still need to mourn the loss and mourn the fact that he went to a hell, that he's going to hell, and he's going to suffer for eternity. That should be sobering to me, not something that I would celebrate.
yeah. Me too. I mean, I still might have bought a cake, but I do like cake for a lot of things, but I don't know if I would, have balloons and everything to celebrate. But I think it would be a sign. It would be a kind of a relief that he's gone.
Sure.
But he is going to be to a much worse place.
For sure. I mean, there should be a sadness about that in one sense, that he he's going to suffer for eternity, and that's the reality of it. And I think there should be a sadness about that, even as we celebrate the justice that he's been removed. There's been evil removed from the world. We celebrate that, but we don't celebrate the fact that he's going to be in hell for eternity.
Just a kind of a little rabbit trail here. This is something I might as well ask you this. Like as believers, we're not supposed to take things into our own hands. Or we leave it in the hands of the Lord?
We leave it in the hands of the Lord. I mean, I don't think we I mean, I would be appalled by people celebrating even the death of somebody who obviously is, Joe Biden did a lot of terrible things, and we probably don't even know a tenth of what he did. But at the same time, I don't think that it's right to celebrate his death. So
yeah, and I know we both know if Donald Trump, something happened to him, there would be a lot of celebrations in the street. But I don't think that's the right way we should be doing it.
No, not at all.
Yeah. And okay. Going back to that was just a little rabbit trail there. Going back to the Texas floods, it's interesting. I watch or follow, I guess, on YouTube a couple of people. One is the Bush Junkie. This I forget her first name, but she does some interesting things on the fires and all this stuff and weather, and also Monkey Works is another guy I follow, and they both have kind of showed that they're doing a lot of cloud seeding in Texas. And in fact, before this storm hit, the one that caused the flooding, they were doing a lot of cloud seeding in that area. Is that something that, and this is something I feel strongly that we should not be doing, but I'm just going to ask you, is that something that we should be messing with the weather like this? Should we be, I don't experimenting with this kind of stuff? Or is it maybe a good thing because you can make it rain if they need it to rain? I mean, what do you think of that?
Oh, well, I am against doing those things. I mean, there's just no good reason for it. I mean, there have always been droughts. There have always been times when there's plenty of rain, and there's always been time when there's more than enough rain, like dealing with flooding. And I can understand damming as an example, damming a river in order to control the floods. I can definitely, that's understandable. And so in some ways, man is controlling his environment in that way. But I think that cloud seeding comes more under the guise of, or under the banner of manipulation. We're trying to manipulate how God has created the hydrological cycle. And I think that's why we get in trouble. And I think that it's led to some incredibly terrible weather events. I think that it potentially had something to do with how that hurricane went, up north and into, North Carolina and Virginia and Tennessee. How that had dumped so much rain. I say Virginia. Maybe Virginia is not involved, but definitely North Carolina and Tennessee was inundated with rain. And I think it had something to do with cloud seeding, even over the Gulf. So I'm against it. I think it's manipulation of the environment, and I don't think there's any good reason for it.
Yeah, I agree. And what they do is they put some kind of, I don't know what it is, something in the cloud. This plane flies back and forth. It releases things. And then they use a Doppler radar kind of system to radiate the clouds to try to, get it to rain. So I don't know if we can say that. I mean, I guess they had, I don't know how much rain in 24 hours, but if that's something that is enhancing it, but it seems to be, like you just said, the storm that hit North Carolina, the hurricane. And I guess what we have to do is watch this, the rest of this summer and into the fall as we come into hurricanes. Will there be more of this happening? Will there be more flooding? It just seems like there's more flooding than I ever remember. And I was going to ask you, maybe it's because we talk about this, everything is now paved, right? There's all these roads and there's not places for water to run off maybe like there was, but there's still something going on with the amount of rain that can fall in just a short amount of time. I've never seen it like that in my lifetime.
Well, definitely our, development, whether it be houses or roads or, buildings or cities where, everything's concrete, has changed the way things drain and can lead to flooding. And, that's why Florida, if you build anything in Florida that has a surface that water can't soak into, you have to build a retention pond to go along with that. That's why when you see these construction projects, they always go with a retention pond, and that's to catch the rain so that it doesn't go out into the system too quickly, so that there's a that it replicates the structure, how much that structure is taking away from the ability for the ground to soak up the rain. And so, yes, any of this stuff is definitely contributing. That, modern development is definitely contributing to the issue. And, because we continue to build and build and build, which I'm not against. I mean, I think building, we should be building. I think that's what God wanted us to do, is to build societies and build, the infrastructure and build the things that hospitals and stuff like that. Those are good things. But, we need to manage that. And, I think probably a lack of management can be blamed for some of this as well. So yeah, but that's different than manipulating the weather, which I think has crossed the line.
Right. I'd like to send a copy of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein to all these people, just because you just don't know. Sometimes you open a door that you just don't want to. And I just don't think any kind of manipulating with with nature is just not a good thing.
No. And I think the same thing goes for some of the things that we're doing in terms of genetics.
Yeah.
That we're manipulating things that ought not be done. So
yeah.
Ought not be manipulated.
Yes, I agree. So that's the Texas floods, and our heart and prayers go out to those families, and that's a big mess down there. So, and we're also against manipulating the weather. That shouldn't be going on. Next, let's talk a little bit about, I don't know how much you know about this. I know a little bit about it, but not a lot. I watched it go through the Senate and then through the House. It passed on the day before the 4th of July, so July 3rd, I think. Trump's big, beautiful bill passed. So apparently some major tax cuts coming and other hopefully good stuff in there. I think border security has been increased and ICE has gotten a lot of money. So I just want to hear your thoughts on that. What do you? I don't know how much you know about it because you've been a traveling man, but how much you know about it?
It's interesting to me that Congress is in a position that to get anything passed, you have to have these big bills that include a lot of different things that are hot button issues for both sides, both Democrats and Republicans. And I think this bill passed based on party line, but it still had to have stuff in it that was a benefit to get the votes that were needed to pass it. And it's interesting because I have a friend who just posted that we need to get back to single issue deals. But I think the problem with that is, and I don't disagree with him in terms of the theory of it. I think that a single issue bill would be a pattern of having single issue bills would be the best thing to do. And that way you can just vote on the merits of that particular thing. And there isn't this compromise that goes on, that they give this in order to get this. And, that compromise is a problem, especially when you're trying to be, truly conservative. And so in practice, I think it would be difficult to do because it's hard to get everybody on the same page, on any single issue. And so, we're left with these big bills these big, beautiful bills that, have all this stuff in them, and we don't really know what's in them until it's passed and it goes into effect. We begin to, there's time afterward to look back and look at it and find out what was in it, but it's too late at that point. It's already done. And it's hard for us as citizens to know for sure how to look at it. Is it a good thing that bill passed? Well, there's some good things in it for sure. I mean, the continuing the tax breaks, the increased deduction, standard deduction, that's part of it as an example. That's that's a good thing that happened. That's a good thing that is part of the bill. And there are other good things in the bill that I think are things that we can get on board with. But the problem is that there's so much in there that it's impossible to know until we have time to see it kind of unfold. And I don't know whether it's a good thing or not, even sitting here today. Optimistically, I would think, and I would hope that it's a good thing. I would hope that, the optimistic view of it is that there's some things in there that are really pretty brilliant from what I've read in terms of how they're, defunding or pushing some of the things to the states and as their responsibility, and also, the funding of colleges and universities. And so, I just don't know how to look at it because it's too big and it's too packed with stuff for me to really put that or have that full understanding that I would want to have before I, endorse something like that.
Yeah. I mean, I think the bill itself was going to be bigger than your book. I think it was like 700 pages or something.
Well, it's definitely going to be bigger than my book, or is bigger.
But yeah, there was a lot in it. So I don't know. Is this something that as believers, we just have to trust Trump and his advisors and pray that it's going to work out, that when it passes, it is going to be better for us than if it didn't pass?
Well, it's hard for me to trust politicians, even a politician that I feel like is generally doing the right thing. It's hard for me to put my trust in them. But I don't have a choice in the sense that I have to trust somebody. I mean, because I'm not making all the decisions, and so I have to put my trust in someone. And at this point, there's no, Trump has mostly done things that I would agree with. So I'm not saying I agree with everything, but mostly has done things that I agree with. So yes, in that sense, I put my trust that he wouldn't have endorsed the bill if it were a bad bill, if it were something that is terrible for the American people. And, and obviously that could prove to be, could prove to be a wrong assumption. And I have to recognize that.
You and I have been around a little bit, but have you ever seen such a divided legislature where you have the Democrats and Republicans? I don't think I've ever seen this large of a gap between them, because when you looked at this big, beautiful bill, it passed 51-50 in the Senate and 216-214 in the House, and it was all party line. Not one really crossed over. And so I don't know if I've ever seen that. It just seems like we are living in such a divide right now. How are we ever going to, how is anybody going to govern like this? It just seems crazy. What do you think?
Well, it's difficult because there's very little middle at this point. And, everybody seems to be, far right or far left. There are definitely a few people who are in the middle, but there's, less and less, especially politically, in terms of, the elected officials. They're, that they've definitely separated. The days of Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill are gone. I guess, and even, Newt Gingrich, and Bill Clinton. That was another example of two guys on both sides of the aisle being able to work together and get things done. And that those days seem to be gone at this point. And I don't think it's a good thing either. I mean, I think it's not a good thing. But I'm not sure what we can do about it other than try to elect officials that, politicians, or try to elect officials who aren't, just basically party line, but want what's best, in terms of how they vote.
Do you think that the Democratic Party is moving farther to the left? Do you think that that's going to kind of pull the Republican Party a little more left than right?
Well, it seems to be radicalizing things. Like as the left radicalizes, I think the right has a tendency to radicalize on the other side. And so I think that's part of what we're seeing. I think that there are people in the middle that may be pulled more left, moderate Democrats or moderate Republicans that might be pulled more, to the left, if that's where, and I think that's what we've seen in the past 25, 30 years and I think that's why things like homosexual marriage and transsexualism, I think that's why, and, the woke theology, the woke stuff, I think that's why it gained a foothold, is because people in the middle, that are more moderate were, being coerced to move further left. But they moved so far left, the left moved so far left that they left those guys behind. So I think that's part of the reason why that's the block of voters that seem to go to Trump that put him over the top. So, yeah, I mean, we live in a partisan age. And where we're siloed, and social media has certainly contributed to that.
Yeah, like I don't know if you heard, but New York, the Democratic Party nominated a socialist who may even be a communist. He won the nomination of the Democratic Party to run for mayor of New York.
Wow.
So I can't say his name, but he's forget where he's from, maybe India.
Can't say his name 3 times.
No, it sounds like some kind of ointment you would put on.
Beetlejuice.
Yeah, but anyway, he won. So it's like it seems like the Democratic Party keeps nominating and running these even more radical people. AOC and all these kind of people are rising to the top of the Democratic Party.
Well, and that hasn't necessarily been a good thing for them. I mean, I do think that's part of the reason why they lost this last election, is because they've become so radical that they've left the moderates behind.
Well, I think before we move to my next topic, I just really quick touch on, I think we need to touch on Donald Trump for a moment, and just how unique, and I think how he will go down in history as one of the most amazing politicians of his time. And we are living through it, where he is such a phenomenon to himself that I don't think, and I think we've talked about this before, no one could have done what he did, win the presidency, then lose, and then come back and win again, even after having an assassination attempt and being going to trial and all these things that he was accused of and found guilty and all this stuff. He is like, I mean, you talk about George Washington, Abraham Lincoln being these big, giant figures in American history. I think if we survive, looking back 100 years from now, Trump will be just this amazing figure. I don't think there's any Republican that could have knocked him out. He was going to run, and he ran 3 times. And I don't think, I mean, if it wasn't for Trump, I think we would have had Hillary Clinton as president and maybe even Harris. But he is just an amazing political figure. I don't know. I just wanted to touch on that real quick and just get your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I think we'd have to be careful not to, err toward idol worship, like thinking that he's something that's, going to deliver us, that he's some, sort of a messianic figure.
Right.
I think we have to see him in according to reality of who he is. And, he definitely, because of his personality, he's got the ability to make things happen. And, he's got the ability to mobilize a lot of people, and the whole MAGA movement as an example. And so, yes, I mean, if you're defining amazing as not necessarily good or bad, but amazing as when it comes to what he's accomplished, and like you say, beating Hillary in 2016, and then losing and getting railroaded out of town, because of the supposed invasion of the Capitol, and getting blamed for all that, and then obviously being drugged through the courts, the system for years, even in terms of the election, and then coming back in 2024 and winning the presidency. It's hard to imagine anybody else being able to do that. He just has that personality that somehow can make those kind of things happen. And he's doing things, as president that there's definitely some brilliant things that he's doing, and things that only he would do, and only he could pull off.
Yeah. Yeah.
At the same time, we do need to be careful, because, he is just a man, and, I'm always cautious when it comes to a guy like him, because he does have so much power that he can influence people in ways that are not going to be beneficial to our nation. And so I think he needs to be held accountable, even among his own party.
I agree. I'm not trying to put him, on Mount Rushmore, but I was just saying, as far as a historical figure, I mean, maybe Teddy Roosevelt was kind of that kind of, remember, he was the youngest president. After the president died, he became president, ran another term, and then he tried to come back and, ran again under the Bull Party, was not elected. I'm just saying, as a political giant, Trump was like a steamroller. There's no one like him. I don't think none of us could say, I'm going to take his tactics and I'm going to run exactly the way he did. It wouldn't work. It only works because of him and his personality. There's something about him that just, he refused to go away. He refused to give up, and he just kept fighting for this. And I'm not saying he's a great guy. I mean, obviously he's not a believer in morally. I don't know a lot of some of the things that he's done. I don't know, but I'm just talking pure politics. I don't think we'll ever see anyone quite duplicate what he did. I don't think we'll see that at least in our lifetime, for sure. And to me, when I look at him, you look at the way the world is running. There's this one world kind of environment that they have an agenda, and it's been going along pretty smoothly, and all of a sudden up comes Donald Trump, and I don't think they knew what to do. They thought he was a joke. They thought there's no way, and then Clinton's going to be the next president, and then after Clinton, they probably had the next person all lined up. So they had all this stuff ready to go, and then he throws a monkey wrench in all that plan, and it just kind of derailed them. I don't think it's going to stop them. I think we're going to see the new world order continue after once Trump leaves. I don't think there's no one really there to stop it. What's going to happen, but I think he's definitely slowed it down. Remember they talked about that in seminary. I think it was Dr. Farnell said that this is going to slow things down a lot, but it won't stop it. That's all I was trying to throw at you is that I think that's what Trump is amazing. I've never seen anything like it.
Yeah, I mean, my fear is that it's going to snap back like a rubber band.
Yeah, it probably will. Yeah.
And, that once they get power again, the Democrats, they're going to do exactly what Trump has done on the Republican conservative side. They're going to do it on the other side. And there's going to be, they did that in 2020. They changed a lot of stuff, right out the gate. They changed a lot of stuff through executive order.
Oh yeah.
And, that's the problem. I think he needs to legislatively work through some of these things as opposed to just doing executive orders. And I think maybe the big beautiful bill, so to speak, is part of that. I just don't know enough about it, to know whether or not it's ultimately a good thing. So
yeah, and I think AOC will be the next president. So I think that's how it'll snap back. We'll be shocked.
Yeah. That would be not cool.
No. Anyway, I want to ask you about this too. Trump and Elon Musk they've kind of had a falling out, and now Elon Musk I guess he's going to start a new party called the American Party. What do you think about that? How will that affect politics going forward if he does that?
Well, if I remember right, I think I kind of called this early.
Yeah, you did.
Like the Elon Musk Trump thing was not something that I didn't think was going to last. And I didn't even in that, I didn't see it to be a spectacular, the division as it became. Obviously, it's interesting because Elon Musk even accused Trump of not putting out the Epstein list because he was potentially on it. And so, I have to say right now that he's the list. They say the list doesn't even exist anymore, or doesn't even exist. And so, I don't know what to make of that. I don't know what to say about it. And I'm waiting at this point. I've taken the stance of waiting before I form an opinion one way or the other, and see how this thing shakes out. It's perplexing to me. And so going back to Elon Musk and Donald Trump, it doesn't surprise me. And it's interesting because I'm not a big Elon Musk fan in many ways because he's doing things that it never made sense to me that he would be a part of the conservative movement because of some of the things that he did or does. That he's obviously on the side of the electric cars and battery powered cars and things like that. And I think there's an agenda there. But he's also doing things that, like implanting stuff into people's heads, I forget what it's called. There's a name for it, but he's doing that. He's involved in so many things. He wants us to go to Mars. I'm not a huge fan of that. But I just don't see any upside to it, but that's where he's at. And I guess I think he would be referred to as a technocrat. Now he's involved in AI and pushing AI. And so, those are some things that I see, sort of leading to the end, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Obviously we're ready for the end, if and when that comes, but at the same time, we shouldn't be, on the side of people who are hastening that end, leading us down that road.
Yeah. Do you see if he does start this American Party, would that be the end of the Republican Party?
No, I don't think so. I don't know that he has enough power to really pull that off. Ross Perot back in the day, I forget what his party was. He started a party, and I think he got 13% of the vote when Clinton and Bush ran against each other. And, he obviously, he affected the election, that particular election, because I think he hadn't pulled those votes from Bush, I don't think Clinton would have won. And so I think it's the same thing here, that if Elon Musk has any success, it's just going to take away from the Republican Party and potentially put the Democratic Party back in power. And, I don't see that as a good thing.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's not a good thing. And if you think Donald Trump has got skeletons in the closet, Musk, yeah, I don't know. I was just looking at his at Ross Perot, and it doesn't really say. It just says independent party, maybe, or independent candidate. I don't remember the name of his party.
An independent candidate, but I think he started a party. I could be wrong.
You could be right, but I don't see it.
But having said that, I mean, the same thing is in play, because if Musk starts a party, he's going to pull more people from the Republican side than he is from the Democrat side, and at least that's what it would seem. And so it definitely wouldn't bode well for the Republican Party. I think he would be better off to stay in the Republican Party and try to influence it in what direction it would go. I don't necessarily agree with many of the things he does, but if he's going to, I think he would be better off to stay and try to be an influence that way.
I agree. Just something just popped into my head to ask you, and I don't know how you feel about this, but I want to ask you. When we read prophecy, the book of Revelation, it talks about these world powers, but the United States, we can't find the United States in Revelation, and people have wondered why. So, are we seeing kind of the beginning of our country imploding itself, or kind of a civil war coming? That was going to be one of my questions, because there was a professor in California that said he believes there's a 80% chance by the year 2030 that there will be a civil war in the United States. And is that kind of how we are weakened and no longer one of the world powers? I'm just going to ask what you think of that.
I mean, it definitely is logical, stands to reason based on what we can see that's what would happen. And, I don't know. It's interesting because, the way God sees nations is probably different than the way we see nations. I mean, in reality, we're kind of an extension of Great Britain, because we were a colony of Great Britain. I don't know. So I don't know that we can necessarily say that the United States isn't in prophecy in the sense of that we're going to be completely wiped off the map whenever that comes along. But, obviously, I say obviously, I mean, I think that I think we would fold into some other power, as far as biblical prophecy. And I mean, that's kind of how I would see it. I don't see the United States completely getting wiped off the map, but I can see us becoming insignificant to what's happening in terms of end times.
Yeah, I think you're going down the same with John Barnett always talks about that there's three reasons why the United States wouldn't be a world power during the end times. And, one of them is some kind of a nuclear attack by another country. Another one would be, what do they call those bombs that knocks out all electricity, electromagnetic bomb or whatever it's called. And also just an implosion in themselves, just the weight of everything that the government's trying to do and support, that the weight of that, our country can't take that anymore, and it just sort of collapses. And it talks about Rome and all these major countries collapsed eventually, and that's what he was kind of saying as that happens. And I'm just looking at where we're heading, and if there is a civil war, it seems like we've never been this divided before, and it's just you wonder why. During the end times when Christ comes back, there's nobody there protecting Israel anymore. And right now, the United States is, but what happens?
Yeah. I mean, the globalists want the demise of the United States, and that does seem to fit into prophecy to happen, that there's going to be a demise. Now, whether or not it's a total collapse and the United States no longer exists, or if it's just being significantly weakened by nuclear war or electromagnetic pulse or whatever the third one was. I can't remember what it was. Civil War, yeah. Whether it's those things or it's something else, I mean, I think it's just going to be rendered insignificant, and we're going to be probably under some other foreign power during that time.
Yeah, the two things that are stopping all this world agenda is Israel and the United States. And if they can just get rid of those two, then everything will fall into place. It seems like that's what they're thinking.
I don't think that they're never going to be able to get rid of Israel. I mean, as hard as even if the United States drops off the map and no longer is there to protect Israel, Israel will still be protected by God, without a doubt, in my mind. But yeah, I mean, it is from a human point of view, it looks bleak for the United States and for Israel.
Yeah, I mean, it's some tough days ahead, which leads me to my next topic, the Israel-Iran situation. The United States went over and bunker-busted bombs, hopefully blew up their refineries and all these nuclear stations where they're trying to build a bomb, and they went over and blew them up. And there's been some controversy that, it didn't do anything, and other people have said, yeah, it did what it was supposed to do, and so we're going to go with it. I think it did do what it was supposed to do and set them back another 20, 30 years at least, maybe more. And so what do you think of that? The Israel-Iran war, it seems to be over. There seems to be a ceasefire, but will it continue?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I mean, obviously Babylon, which is Iran, has always been an enemy of Israel. And so we're just seeing an extension of that, now, that's a modern version of Israel versus Babylon back then. And so in that sense, yeah, I think the conflict is going to continue. I don't know, the current situation that's happening, is it going to flare back up over the next few weeks or months? I don't know. I mean, I have no way of knowing that. I think in the big picture, that there will continue to be a conflict because Israel is going to be in conflict with the entire world at some point.
Yeah, will Iran counterattack somehow, or what do you think of this? What do you think, because we went in and helped Israel, will Iran somehow do some terror attacks here in the United States? Well,
that's certainly reasonable to think that that's what's going to happen. I think that's I'm kind of surprised that it hasn't happened already.
Yeah.
In terms of, that sort of thing. So I think we can expect a reprisal that way, that they would do that. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's just hard to, tell for sure what, is going to happen in the future, except big picture.
Yeah, I think we even talked about, or you mentioned that this summer could be, call it the summer of love. There could be some protesting and some kind of riots going on. And we saw that kind of starting with the ICE raids, things like that, and which I guess we can flow into the ICE raids and talk a little bit about this. ICE is going in and trying to. They're not trying to. There's rumors that they are going in and just grabbing illegal aliens off the street, but I think what they're doing, and this is what I've heard, is that they're going and taking illegal aliens who have a record, who have committed a felony or something, and then they're kicking them out of the country. And some of these guys are some bad guys. They're either gang members or they've done sex trade or that kind of child pornography, those kind of things, which I see no problem. I think if you do things like that and you're not a citizen, yeah, we should kick you out. But what do you think about all that? What do you think about immigration and all this stuff? How should we think as believers on all this stuff?
Well, I think, we do need to think in terms of the Old Testament, and God, said to Israel, they needed to love the foreigner. And so we do need to have a situation where people can legitimately change their, come to America and be here and be American. And that's fine if foreign people want to come do that. My son-in-law is in the process of becoming an American. He's probably 3 or 4 years away from completing that process. But that's a good thing. I mean, it's not a bad thing, and we actually need people. We actually, because the birth rate has dropped, we need people who are going to come in and help shore up that loss of, the birth rate problem. And so I'm pro-immigration in that sense for sure. I am anti-immigration. I'm anti-illegal immigration.
Yeah.
And so, people coming in here illegally, my son-in-law came in, he did it the right way. He came in, he went to school, he applied to stay as a resident. And, he was able to get that, and he's a resident now. And, eventually is going to become his plans to become a citizen. And I think that's the right way to do it. And on the other hand, there are people that just have come in and just basically illegally and not gone through the process. And, there have been some that have refused to go through the process, and they've refused to assimilate in the United States by learning the language and learning the culture and understanding the culture. And so they are not American in that sense. And so I don't think that those people that are in a position of coming in illegally and haven't assimilated, I don't think they should stay. Now, I do think that if they haven't broken the law and they have been here long term, I do think that there should be some legitimate path to citizenship. But I think that those who have broken the law, and at least at a felony level, I'm not talking about traffic tickets and things like that, but I'm talking about have committed felonies. Those people need to go. I mean, they just, if they're not here documented as a citizen, they need to go back to their country because they are not people that we want here.
Yeah. I agree with that. When you come into someone's home, you try to be respectful and you don't just go and start rearranging all their furniture and throwing stuff around. And yeah.
Well, it's interesting because I traveled to Guatemala a few weeks ago, and my wife and I did our best to understand as much of the language as we could. Now, we haven't been exposed to it enough to be able to speak, to be able to converse in Spanish, but we did want to be respectful to their home and try to do our best to speak as much Spanish as we possibly could, to the simple level that we could. And I think that's the right thing to do. I think it's the right thing to do. So if I go to another country, I need to learn their language. I need to learn their culture, and I need to respect them in that way. And they should do the same thing for us. If people coming from other countries, they should do the same thing. And I don't think there's anything wrong with asking them to do so.
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at every country's laws, they all have that. If you want to become a citizen there, you have to learn the language, you have to understand their laws, and you have to abide by them. And
sure,
to just have open borders, to me, that doesn't make sense, because you don't know who's here and who they are, and yeah.
Well, it's a violation of Scripture, really, because God is the one who set those boundaries.
Yes,
He's the one who fixed the boundaries of the nations, and so. For me to say, for us to say, we're just going to open it all up, there's going to be no boundaries, that goes against God's plan. And what's interesting is it's actually kind of like the Tower of Babel. That was the issue there, is that they came together as one. And that's what we're trying to do now, is that's the whole push, is to do away with all the borders and be open borders. So, we're all one as humanity, under one global government. It's no different than, again, what happened in Genesis chapter 11.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And if you look at the American experiment here, our country, it was supposed to be a melting pot of all these different cultures, but to form into one culture, the American culture, which is what had happened from 1776 to, 1999 or whatever, But sure. Lately, what we're seeing people come in with their culture and setting up their own little squares over here of their cultures, all these little pockets, rather than bringing their culture with them, but also embracing the American culture. They're like starting They're like bringing a little Mexico city over here and a little Iranian city over here and a Haitian city over here. So that's not the way it was really meant to be.
Sure. I do want to say something about, I didn't specifically address, ICE and what they're doing. I do think that there have been mistakes that have been made. I'm trusting at this point that they're mistakes and not, people doing things, deporting people that shouldn't be deported for nefarious reasons. I trust that those mistakes that have been made are quote unquote honest mistakes until proven otherwise. I think in any type of large operation like that, where you're trying to deal with literally millions of people, there are going to be mistakes. There's going to be situations that you can point to and say, well, they shouldn't have done this. But I don't think that should discredit the whole, right? I should look at everything from a big picture point of view and understand that this is the direction things go, even though sometimes in the details it doesn't work out exactly that way.
Yeah, I agree. There's going to be mistakes, and sometimes you can't always be perfect, but you're trying to do the best you can.
Well, hopefully those mistakes get rectified. I mean, I think that they do there needs to be, I'll say, a level of humility. I know that's certainly not a term that the world likes, but I think there should be a level of humility when a mistake is made, that mistake is changed, is rectified as soon as we find out that it's a problem or that it is a mistake.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see what happens going forward. There's a lot of protest and violence going on with the ICE agents when they go in to make an arrest. So we'll see if that continues. If that escalates, we don't know.
Nope, we don't.
So as we've been almost an hour of just us blabbing here, but as we leave here, is there anything that you think is on the horizon or something that we need to look out for, or for the rest of the summer? We have about 55 days of summer left. So what are you thinking for the rest of summer, or will things go along pretty much as they are?
Well, I think there's always going to be some stuff. I mean, I think that the change is accelerated to the point where we can expect something big to happen almost on a daily basis. I think this, for Christians, we need to pay attention to things that are happening, especially on a macro level. Things like AI that are happening, things that are happening politically. We definitely need to be wise and trying to understand those things, and work to apply biblical doctrine and understanding to what's happening in the world. And hopefully we've modeled that. Hopefully, even in our conversation, we've modeled, a biblical worldview as we deal with, those more modern political realities.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a good way to end it. And we had quite a few topics we could have gone to. We had a little more things going on, but we'll end it with that. There's a lot happening in our world today, and like you said, everything is sped up. I think and it'll be interesting to see with AI how everything is changing. And we might not see it, but it is changing behind the scenes. So it's interesting.
It's like the Charlie Rich song, "Behind Closed Doors."
That's funny how you would remember that song.
Yeah, probably most of our listeners wouldn't.
Charlie Rich, that's going back a ways.
That is going back a ways.
Oh, man. You've been listening to Fresh Bread, a podcast ministry of Grace Bible Church Gainesville. For more information, go to gracegainesville.org. And thanks for listening.